and my father, and they married and sired 2 boys. And then came the war, the Second World War, 1939, and Gustav Wolf was too old, and Max May, he was busy in the construction industry, probably also too old. But my father got drafted because he was also old in those days already, 38 for a soldier. But the German Reich and their great leader, they needed manpower.
Everybody.
So he was drafted not too far away to this Poznan uh, garrison, okay, for a few months, and then this was shortly before the war was on already. I don't know when he was drafted, but usually a training period, a basic course, a boot camp was 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't know when he was drafted, whether the war was on. Probably the war was already on. So after his training, he was attached to a kind of a pioneer outfit, and because he had kind of relation to the construction industry or woodworking or something. So with this pioneer unit, they went into Russia, and this location where he died, this was actually Bielorussia, White Russia, not directly Russia. It was attached to another area there. Nowadays it's called Bielo, means white. Bielorussia is allied now with the Russian Federation, with Putin's outfit, okay? But they are not, they are allied, but they are not the real Russia. They are, and so, and there, on the way marching forward, nightfall, that I remember that. The unit camped in a forest, and it was close to the front line. And the Russians had not much of an air force, but singular planes sometimes from the 1920s or early 30s. They had just a few of those somewhere, some here, and so the Germans knew that by night those planes flew around and looked for light on the ground, you know. And so the unit was ordered not to fiddle around with lights by night, just in the dark forest and some tents or whatever they had. But somebody must have lightened something. There was a Russian plane around, and how they did it, and the Russians anyway, they weren't that advanced in those days yet. Later on in 45, yeah, but they had American planes and different ways. But in 1939 or 41, 42 he died, yeah, they had those singular planes, usually open, no closed-in cockpit, and they had concocted bombs, and they looked down where they saw something and dropped the bomb. Like in the First World War, they dropped it over the side and let it go, you know. And this bomb hit right smack in the middle of that bivouac, of that camp, you know. And 17 people were immediately finished, and a bunch of others wounded. My father was one of the dead. So this was within the course of the war, more or less a non-event. It happened every day. You know. So, yeah, he was 38 when he died. Yeah. So he was actually fairly old for a soldier. Usually they drafted in those days the generation, or how they call it, the years, the birth years 1922, 23. In 42 they were just 20. Those guys they need because they are dumb and they do anything, for the fatherland. The older ones are smarter. So they take the young ones first, but when there is need, they take the older ones too. And so my father ended up like that.
So what happened then after your father died?
Well, my mother, of course, the widow, she got notified, and so she didn't know what to do. Uh, she lived in the house with my grandmother, Agnes, and this Gustav Wolf, who every 3 months went for a week or two into the liquids and was non-existent, okay? And after that, for a month or so, he was very agitated and a little bit off the rocker, okay? But because Herbert, my father, was a son of Agnes, they lived in this house this Gustav Wolf had built there. And I remember it was upstairs, a mansard, they call it a mansard, not attic, but slightly slanted roof walls. So it may not, I think it was not the greatest communication business, and it was not that great, okay? So now my father died, and she felt probably kind of isolated, or with two kids like that. So I think maybe something like a year later, she anchored up with a rich farmer's boy from across town, Diekmann, his name. And that was a rich farmer's family since ever in this area, with large holdings and, in those days, oxen and horses and those heavy field wagons with wheels like that, with iron ringed, and I remember that. And she moved over there to get away from this outfit here, okay? And shortly thereafter, the war turned kind of out in disfavor of the German forces, and here came 1944, and this Mr. Dümke, the farmer's boy, was drafted to Berlin to, anti-aircraft, and she was now again with a strange, more or less, relatives, and a house much fancier and bigger than the other one, and it was not the right thing either, but I don't know much about that. However, here came the end of 44, and the German forces were pushed back from the east towards west, and it was now December 1944, and winter time, and German soldiers streamed through the little town of Fietz towards the west, with all kinds of equipment and stuff. And not too far away, I remember they said 25 kilometers away or so, which is in wartime not so very far away. Boom, boom, it was close, yeah. And also Russian soldiers who fought with the German forces. They came through the town. I still see them on their little, what they called pannier wagons. They had those little apple carts, with two wheels only, and a pony in front and a machine gun and stuff. And they just rattled to town because they didn't want to fall into Russian hands because so Rückzug sozusagen, Rückzug. So the Russians came closer and closer, and I think the refugees came from the East Prussian and West Prussian from. They also fled before the Russians came. They came with wagons loaded with up to the sky with goats and a cow on a rope behind, and Oma and Opa high up on the wagon, and the man was Kutschier, the Kutscher, So they came also to this house here, this Dümke house, and they said they didn't have much time, they just went to a bakery and bought a whole bunch of bread, and then they camped in the yard for an hour or two, and then they took off, went with the soldiery west, 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 and the sound of the war came closer, and there was one train still in the station. It was bound for Berlin towards northwest actually. And I think my grandmother came over. They were not in great communication anymore because my grandmother was a little bit ticked off because my mother had married so shortly after, yeah, but she was desperate and didn't know what to do. It was just a marriage of convenience, I would say. However, I think the grandmother came over and said that she should take the boys and go to this train station and take the train and leave everything. Now, this wasn't an easy decision if you think in your own terms, if you have to leave without, So she packed a few things, like an iron.
Most important to have in a wartime, an iron.
Like an iron, and a little Spitz dog. You know how a Spitz looks. They're cute, like a little foxy thing, He was young, and then she chopped the head off a chicken in the yard she could catch, and packed this and a few things in a bag. I don't know. And she gave me that little Spitz and a muff, what they called a muff. That was a round thing, like
put your hands in.
Put your hands in. And she stuffed a little dog in there in my hands, and I had to tag along to the railway station. And the conductor was already giving signs, and those wagons, they had little steps, attached to the wagon. The last wagon, the last door, the train was already poof, 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 beginning to, and some people opened the door, or she opened, I don't know, and we just got in, and then the train started rolling, and it went across the Oder River towards Berlin, and the front was, in those few hours, so much closer that the German pioneer troops had prepared the Oder Bridge. The Oder this is all soft land there, and rivers in soft land are usually wide. They are not that deep, but wide, And so the bridge was endless, with all those girders, and it was night time now, almost Christmas, 22nd or 23rd of December 44, and we had. I sat in the last wagon of the train, in the last compartment. Behind me was a wall, there was nothing anymore. And I sat there with this little doggy and a bunch of people, all kinds of people, And so the train went across this bridge with no light, and just slowly across the bridge. And then when the last wagon was across, the bridge went, up. And was quite a bang. And then the train moved on slowly to this next town, Christine. This was a kind of like a county seat, I don't know, and a bigger town anyway. And there the train was sitting among many other trains. There are many tracks, I don't remember details. There are many tracks. It was like the Edmonton Calder area here, one track beside the other, a big maneuvering station. And the train was sitting there in the dark, and nobody knew anything. And another locomotive had moved a train that was all freight cars, had moved the freight cars full of wounded soldiers, but the other locomotive was pushing that train, and it got onto the track where our train was sitting and pushed the freight cars into the rear of this train here, And I just saw this big flash behind me. It was like a gigantic flash, and the other buffers, when they hit the
Keep going. Keep going.
And the wagons went up like that, 5-6 meters high, and
Okay. I don't know what's going on, but you talk.
well, anyway, the people jumped out of the window. A soldier with one arm in a sling, he had a rifle. He whacked out the glass out of the windows there, and people jumped out, and I was the last one, and I looked down, and I could see deep down, just snow and stuff, and I want to hang on to the window and the shards, and cut my fingers. Anyway, the soldier, I think he took the dog and just threw him out of the window into the snowbank down there, and then me. I was my first flight, okay. And then I don't know what happened then. However, we went on somewhat to Berlin, and went into the area south of Berlin where this Aunt Pauline was living. She had the house there,
right,
which I later inherited, 50 years later, 60 years later. And that's where we stayed then. Berlin got bombed. I remember that noise, 1,500 bombers. How the air is vibrating, and then in the distance by night, Berlin like a dome, a light dome, all flames and explosions. But this was outside, this was not that bad, And so that was the story then. Yeah. And my mother, a young woman from about 1912, how old was she then? 45, 33, with 2 kids and no husband, widow, no money, no nothing. wartime. People are mean. So I can understand that somehow nowadays. Many women just lost it. So that's how I ended up in Berlin then. If the war wouldn't have happened, and I would have probably ended up in this furniture factory there, and but it didn't happen like that. So yeah, so this was a short story, and my father was gone. Yeah, I remember. I have dim memories. I must have been 42. I was 3 years old. Yeah. I think he came home one time from training there, and Poznan wasn't too far away, I guess. So, and I remember a tall fellow, but nothing nothing particular. I don't know. So it was a kind of a weird, wild time, you know.
Didn't your grandma